Are we doing all right? So you can see me in the corner, and here's the slides. Okay.
Yes, you're doing well.
Are we all right?
We're good. Very good.
Okay. So you'll notice that my class of 63 was the very important anniversary in Haddonfield history. And let's see if we can get her. Wait a minute. Where are we going here? Okay, I'm going to hit the play. That'll work. So here I am, little Tommy Hughes, on Duke of the Wind, the pony that was lived next door, and I was one of those one of those unusual little boys who grew up in a town that was founded by a woman, and this didn't happen. This was not a common occurrence. What I see in this picture that you might not see is that pony was a great pleasure, and we rode it all over, but it was also a source of manure for the family compost pile, which was an integral part of the family's extensive vegetable garden. It was naturally all organic long before that became a popular concept. We kids weeded and picked off bugs the old-fashioned labor way. And here we are, my sister and I. No, that's not a picture of me. In those days, we didn't take pictures of everything. We just did things, right? So but we did all the weeding. We picked off the bugs, and in the winter, my family pored over these wonderful color seed catalogs, and the produce from our garden that we didn't eat fresh was canned. And I can remember the rows of cans in our basement. So my childhood was really a remnant of what basically was rural Haddonfield. Growing up in the 50s, there were so many remnants of the way Haddonfield had been for forever. My home was between two barns. This is an example of what it would have looked like. The barn held the hay and the feed for the horse, and the compost pile in the garden would have been in the back. On the other side of my house was this more carriage house barn. People, of course, had to put their carriages somewhere. And I grew up in this house, 351 Kings Highway West. And you can see there on the left my little effort at showing the way it was. The house went through from the front street to the back street. We had a full yard, and there's the two barns between. And you can see how close I was to Elizabeth Haddon Elementary School. I was one of those people who grew up with, went to a school named after the founding member of the town. And also you can see in this picture that this was basically the west part of Haddonfield was originally the Hinchman Farm. And of course, all of Haddonfield was originally farmland. And before that, of course, it was Native Americans who were hunting and fishing and farming as well. So after the Hinchman Farm was sold, it became a country club. And then the country club was then developed, the land was developed into homes. I can remember, I can see the little stream here. I still got do I still have my cursor? No, I don't have my cursor. Anyway, the very southernmost, or the source of the Newton Creek, was right near my neighborhood, and we used to go, and we kids rode our pony all over that neighborhood because a lot of the land was still undeveloped. And so we rode the pony around the neighborhood at the time, open, undeveloped fields. I remember trying to build a raft near the very source of Newton Creek, not far from my elementary school in Redmond's Woods. I learned recently that Walt Whitman himself would canoe from Crystal Lake to hang out where many years later we kids used to play. So I think that's pretty much that slide. Oh, I also wanted to mention that it has been claimed that children like me, born during World War II, are the last of the organic generation, in that we had no residues of agricultural chemicals in our bodies, as those products were developed in the post-war years when chemical warfare facilities were converted to supplying herbicides, fungicides, and pesticides in the nation's farms. So again, we're a pretty unique generation of of folks. So again, there were lots of remnants of the way things used to be. Before we had a refrigerator, we had an ice box, and ice was delivered. Coal was delivered down into the chute in the basement before we got a gas-fired thing. That pony that next door, the farrier would come. I can remember the smells and the sounds, and just being mesmerized by the work he did. We had orchards. We had peach trees and fruit trees, and besides the garden in the backyard, and I can always remember churning peach ice cream from our own peaches, and applesauce. We had apples, and that's a wonderful applesauce maker that I treasure, and I remember helping my mother use that tool. We had milk delivered, and even potato chips. So in those days, I came home from school every day for lunch until high school. I never saw a cafeteria until I got to high school. Kids, by the way, were expected to, in my family at least, were expected to come to breakfast, come to all the meals, prepared to participate in the conversation, to help clean up and serve. And Sunday dinner was a very special event, which was held in the dining room. On occasions, once of special, we would go out to the Manor House in Morristown, which was a big treat, and they had these wonderful relish trays, which are the remnant of the Dutch culture in the Delaware Valley, with all sorts of wonderful sweets and sour things. And once a week, we would go to Yvonne's Diner over in Westmont because my mom didn't want to cook and my dad was away. So Saturday night, we had fixed meals, basically. Saturday night was New England boiled dinner, classic corned beef and cabbage. And I can remember my parents making just mounds and big pots of soup from the garden. And this was something that they would get canned for the winter when we. Another funny story, I had a friend whose father worked for Campbell Soup. Maybe everybody had a friend who worked for Campbell Soup. And they tried a product which was supposedly a Scandinavian specialty fruit soups, and it was not a success. And so when you visited him, I frequently came home with my bike basket full of canned fruit soups, which I don't think we liked either. I don't know if any of you remember all that. So I want to ask you something about all this. Now, here's a question for you all, okay? What first comes to mind, positive or negative, when I say childhood food memory? What comes to mind, positive or negative, when I say a childhood food memory? Now, hold that thought for now, all right? So this is a really important subject to me, and I've written an entire book about Your Food Memories Matter. Pursuing personal food histories can lead to healthier families and more sustainable communities, all right? So I would answer that question by saying McClintock's Pastry Shop is what always comes to mind when I think of an early childhood food memory, besides all those other things I was mentioning. This was the place where we got incredible layer cakes, where we got the sticky buns. And on Saturday, we would go shop there and we would get Danish pastries that could only be eaten on Sunday morning breakfast. And I've been to Denmark, so I know that the McClintock's people really knew how to make proper Danish pastries. Unfortunately, these people worked so hard, and they were an institution in the town the years I was growing up. When they retired, they just left, as far as I know, and they didn't leave any of their archives or memorabilia to the town archives. Unfortunately, I tried to track it all down. It's all in my memory, though. Exactly what the place looks like, exactly how the operation was. It's in some of my books. In fact, I've mentioned this place in I don't know how many of my books. So a very important memory for me. Another important memory was Newmar's, which actually was in an old tavern, Gibbs Tavern, and Newmar's was this wonderful place where you could get practically anything you needed. And you can see in the lower left corner there was one of these, which was a soft drink cooler. And if you knew had the right friend who always had an extra money, like Bobby Duncan, you would follow him to Newmar's and he would buy everybody a soda, and you'd reach in and you'd get this cold bottle of, was swimming in ice water, and you'd get it. And then on the side there, you'd get the cap hooked off and you drink it standing around Newmar's. And then you put the bottle down in the carton and then you go off. Also, it's a great place to get tasty cakes. Tasty cake is absolute Philadelphia tradition. And there's those butterscotch crimpets. And a fascinating story in that this company really did make very fresh ingredients and fresh products. And they took them off the shelves after a few days. You can research that there was a boycott led by African American leaders in Philadelphia at one point because they said they're not hiring enough drivers, black drivers who were which was the most lucrative part because these people were the ones who were salesmen and all that. So it's a very important history to look into, the Tasty Cake Company. So if we had enough money, we could get a soda, or a soda fountain drink or something at Sunray Drugs on the corner there, and notice the bike and that. So we all rode bikes everywhere, and Mr. Fisher's bike shop, right next to the Episcopal Church, was the place where we had our bikes fixed, where we bought our bikes. My parents bought our bikes for us, and also he sold penny candy, which was always a place for us to be able to make some decisions about spending money. So Haddonfield, it was a place when I was growing up that presented itself as what seemed to me mostly a Revolutionary War story, and it certainly did have a place in the Revolutionary War, and it's very important. And the Haddonfield Historical Society and all that has covered it very well. And but I always thought there was something more to the town than just its role in the war. Of course. So every day walking into Haddonfield High School, you could walk past this plaque, which mentioned that the Hessian soldiers occupied the land and on their way in and out of the various battles. And what is not mentioned on here was that it was actually, before it was a high school, it was a farm, a very prosperous farm of the John Middleton family. And what is also not mentioned here is that when the Hessians left, they took the family's cows with them. Except for one, when they pleaded that they had young children, please let us stay one cow. This is an oversight on that side because it's a food story. It's very much a food story, and it's not complete, and it's inaccurate in many ways. So that's one of the things that I hope to correct, and I point out in the book that I wrote. Of course, all armies everywhere have had to eat, and so when they move from place to place, they of course had raided and taken and maybe sometimes paid for the provisions of the farms and the houses and the homes. And in the case of Haddonfield, many of the people would go and hide their livestock, would hide their food resources and stocks because these armies were coming back and forth through the place, and they needed to take action. So I first got interested in food history and the origins of food when I was a junior year abroad in Florence, Italy. And I lived with an Italian family, and the fact that they all came home to eat at the same time, and the respect for food was very much what I experienced with my family. And then I was in the Peace Corps in Iran, which opened me up to a whole new world of food. Growing up in Haddonfield, I ate very well, but it was mostly that British colonial Dutch heritage of foods, and I never even had a pizza until I left Haddonfield. And so when I went off into the world, having been secured by and well nourished in Haddonfield, I opened up the travel to the world, and as people of my generation did. I mean, we were the first generation of middle-class kids to travel extensively. I mean, we were the Europe on $5 a day group. And so when we came back, we brought, we said, hey, the rest of the world drinks really good coffee and beer. And so our generation, my generation, you can fault us for a whole lot of things, but one of the things we did was we brought knowledge of and encouraged, the world's food to come back. And it's wonderful to see Haddonfield now because of so many different ethnic restaurants we know. So my wife and I are probably best known for our establishment of the world's first potato museum. We were invited to tour France, for instance, and to write about food museums and heritage sites, and we did that. And so I came back to the States and knowing that I was, we lived in Belgium for a number of years. So when we came back to the States, I realized I know a lot about the world's foods and places. I don't know much about my own hometown until I pulled off the shelf this book, Lost Haddonfield, which completely opened my eyes, and it led me to understand what I thought was there's a whole lot of other story about Haddonfield than just its revolution. And I treasure this book. I treasure all the historians and people who have worked so hard to preserve the story of Haddonfield's rich and important history. So first we eat, that's what MFK Fisher used to say. But first, before we eat, we have to have something to eat. By the way, there are very few pictures that I could find in the archives of people eating in Haddonfield. Again, people just ate. They didn't take pictures of eating. But anyway, so you have to have something to eat. And then, of course, you have to have bees because there would be less food. And this is a wonderful collection of old bee hives and the wax things that are in the basement of the historical societies. A wonderful collection there. So I talked about my interest in the supply chain. So here's the Schleck Bakery. They had two locations in Haddonfield. He was a neighbor of mine on Kings Highway when he retired. But just think about it. A bakery needed flour. So some farmers were growing the wheat. That bakery needed butter and milk. Some dairies were doing that. It would have been the Guild dairies right there. A baker needed sugar and it needed all sorts. So all of this had a supply chain, and it can't just be taken for granted that a bakery. Oh, there's a bakery. No, a bakery is a complicated thing. The mills just alone would have had to, of course, grind the flour, produce the flour. And by the way, everything up until very close to the mid-century was locally. People either produced their own everything or it was available locally. I'm interested in small and large groceries. The corner stores is so important to neighborhoods and for kids to be able to make decisions on small purchases. Haddonfield was very well known for its pottery, making tankards and things like this for breweries and all sorts of items for restaurants and home use. So let's talk about what is it about Haddonfield's location that made it such an important market town. So you have the Cooper River coming out of basically Haddonfield area and flowing into the Delaware River. The Cooper River, it was basically a creek, was navigable all the way to Haddonfield, and then a little bit past there, it was a place where you could cross, where native people and everybody else could cross. It was a fording place. So you had a navigable part of the river, and then very quickly you had a place where you could cross the river. This is interesting. So of course, the Lenape people were there. Were original people there. In 1600, when the first Europeans settled in New Jersey, there was an estimated 12,000 of them. 100 years later, when Elizabeth Haddon arrived, there were fewer than 2,500. This old sign put up in 1906, I think it was, honors the trails that Native Americans first developed in this area. And Kings Highway and True's Landing, that's the location. Isn't the word landing interesting when you think about it? The landing. It's a dock, right? But in that area, it was called a landing. It was a very important part. So original people, native people were in the Haddonfield area for the various locations for the various reasons I mentioned. Their cropping was corn, beans, and squash. They were hunters and fishers as well. And back to fertilizer, the tradition was you would plant the corn seed with a little mound, and in the mound would be a fish to use as the fertilizer. So this is what a settlement might have looked like. You can see they're hunting over there because, of course, the animals need to come down to the water source. They're doing the fishing and they're doing all sorts of food processing. This is a 1700 map of the area. And you'll see that the location of the ford there where the roads are crossing, and you'll see the names of the farmers that were there. Francis Collins of 1682 was the original first farmer in the area, Richard Matthews, and he's the one, his land was sold to the John Haddon, and that's the property that Elizabeth Haddon arrived to manage. Notice there's two businesses that are mentioned on this map, a smith shop and a mill. Of course, these are two completely critical industries or enterprises for any community. So my East Haddonfield tour of food heritage sites begins at Evans Pond, that the place where the Native Americans would have had their settlement, and also a place where the creek could be forded, could be crossed without a bridge. And then it goes over to Stoy's Landing, which is the place where the river is still navigable. Then it takes over to Elizabeth Haddon's home. And then the Hadrosaurus site, the first complete dinosaur skeleton, and then it makes up and down Kings Highway. So here's Evans Pond. Evans Pond was the site of several mills in the early history of Haddonfield, because that's where the water was and where it was available. And farmers would come from far away to have their grain processed. But the early mills didn't have much of a capacity to grind and produce flour, so the farmers would stay overnight until their flour was made, and these were called lodge mills. So we're going to go up the creek along Pennypacker Park and go over to Grove Street, where it crosses the Cooper River, and this was the site of Stoy's Landing. This sign used to be there on the bridge, but it's not there anymore. And barges, flat bottom barges, would come in from Philadelphia and Camden, loaded with everything that the beginning community needed, and taking away all the farm supplies and the products that the farms in the area of Haddonfield was producing. Back to fertilizer, one of the interesting things that Stoy developed. Stoy was, by the way, a Swedish immigrant, an entrepreneur. He was into everything. He was so important because everything came by the barge, by the Cooper River, that the community needed and was selling. So one of the things that came up from Philadelphia was street dirt. Street dirt. What? What's street dirt? Street dirt was in Philadelphia and the cities at the time. They would periodically scrape the streets because they were full of manure, and because all the traffic was horse-drawn, and they would bag this up and sell it as a fertilizer. So this street dirt would come in on the barges, and Philip Stoy would market it and and sell it and trade it and all that sort of thing. So here's what. See if we can get this to run. Nope. In the early 18th century, this was the port of Haddonfield, Stoy's Landing, where the Cooper River is still a tidal flow up to this point. And so barges would come from Philadelphia on the incoming tide and unload all the products that the new community needed. And then products would be put on from the farms, Elizabeth Haddon's farms and others, and would be floated down on the down tide back to down the Cooper River to the Delaware River, and then across to Philadelphia, and also markets in Camden. So this is Stoy's Landing, a very important place in the founding of the community of Haddonfield and this whole region. So this is Haddonfield. This is the this is the farmhouse of Elizabeth Haddon and her husband John Estall, and the remaining part of this original is the brew house, and this is what it looks inside. They were brewers. They made ale, beer. And they made medicines as well, herbal medicines there.
I just want to stop real quick. I think when you played the video, your sound was altered, because you sound very faint all of a sudden.
What do we do now?
Is your video still on, perhaps?
Oh.
Okay, and this recording, I'm recording this, Hassie's barking or something.
To me, it's not on.
There you go. You sound better now. Yeah, I'm hearing it fine.
Well, I see. Do I still sound okay?
You sound better.
Fine. Great. So, So there's no images of Elizabeth Haddon. There's not much. There's actually a whole book written about the real Elizabeth Haddon and exploring the myths and all that, which I recommend. Up at all of the years that I grew up, there was this very tired, very illegible sign on the tree at the graveyard talking about her. And recently they put this sign up, which is gives a little more sense of her. She was on a 500-acre farm, but she was busy selling properties and the land management and developing Quaker communities all over the place. She didn't have time or the energy or she could supervise people, but who was doing all that work of the farm? Well, it was enslaved people, actually. This is a marker of the market where the slave market was in Camden. And it's a picture of harvesting of hay. Is done by enslaved and indentured people. So it's really great to see that the community has recognized its Black history, and high school students have been very involved in this. There's a walking tour of this. And they're also doing a series of publications in which people recall their experiences growing up African American in the community. One part of the tour, it goes to the Blazing Rag Tavern, which was, we knew it as the Hess Tavern. It was just on the other side of the creek, just outside of Haddonfield. And this place was accepted everybody. It was an important place where there were no segregation. There was nobody excluded. And it has Blazing Rag. You want to look it up. Why it got that name is fascinating. Kings Road, Haddonfield was a dry town for many, many years, certainly all the years I grew up. And Doug Rauschenberger is doing now these tavern and temperance walking tours because there's a tavern and a beer brewery back in Haddonfield. One of the most indispensable animals, certainly, of any community in those days was the horse. And so what do horses need? They need feed. They need hay and feed. And this was the little grocery and the general mercantile store attached to Indian King. They need farms to grow all of that hay and oats and feed. They need barns and stables. You can see there, everybody had a barn and a stable. These are the stables that the Quaker meeting used because people would come from distant farms and they would need to have their things protected. Also, horses need to be controlled. So you had harness makers and you had saddle makers, and you needed vehicles. So you had all sorts of vehicles, and these were all made, or many of them were made in Haddonfield. This is Tools blacksmith shop, which is across from the graveyard. It's where Haddon Cleaners was, and just on Haddon Avenue than when I was growing up. This is an essential place because not only were they making wagons and all sorts of farm equipment and implements, but they were making frying pans and kettles and cooking utensils and all sorts of things. A totally essential part of the growth of Haddonfield were the blacksmith shops. So here's one of the residents of the Gill family. The Gills were very prosperous farmers in Haddonfield, and is now, of course, the home of the Historical Society. In the basement, there's this wonderful collection of tools that Don Wallace assembled, and is now being cared for by Mike Underwood. And you can see there's a 3-hole privy hole down there, besides farm tools, and all sorts of cooking implements and baking and all that. It's just it's an extraordinary collection. I've seen tool collections, and this one is really first rate. So you've got you need developing communities needs, of course, lumber, coal, need hardware. They need all that. They also, again, need fertilizer. And Haddonfield is unique in the world as the home of the first place where the most complete dinosaur skeleton was found, and it was found on the banks of the Cooper Creek, where they were digging marl, and they found all these bones. And this sign says, this is what it was. They were marl, but it doesn't actually say that marl was being used for fertilizer. So the whole idea of finding these bones was a result of the need for fertilizer for the farms. So that's a little bit of an oversight. So we got to the